She put something in your drink. I saw her, the little girl said to the Mafia boss. Nikolai Voss sat in the dark panelled study of his Moscow mansion, his broad frame folded into the ornate leather chair that had always made him look like a man who owned the room. Today it made him look like a man the room was swallowing. His charcoal suit jacket was on, his tie was loosened, his collar was open at the throat in a way that Nikolai Voss, a man whose discipline extended to the precise knot of his tie at 7 each morning, would never have permitted 4 months ago. 4 months. That was how long his body had been betraying him. Tremors in his hands that he disguised as impatience, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles whitened. Fatigue that no amount of sleep relieved. A heaviness that arrived each morning before he opened his eyes and stayed through the night. Confusion that came without warning, blurring the edges of a mind that had always been his sharpest weapon. He had seen 7 specialists. Each one had returned the same answer, dressed in different language. Nothing identifiably wrong. No diagnosis. No cause. No solution. He had begun, privately and with the particular cold clarity of a man accustomed to facing facts, to believe he was dying. He was right. He just had the wrong cause. It was an ordinary afternoon when Lily appeared in the study doorway. She was 5 years old, perhaps 6, small and slight in an oversized faded yellow sweater and denim overalls that had no business in a room like this. She was Elena's daughter, the housekeeper's child, brought along on a shift because there was nowhere else for her to go. Adults moved around Lily the way adults moved around small children in serious places, without looking, without registering, certain that she absorbed nothing. They had been wrong for 3 days. Natasha was standing near the drinks cabinet, her emerald silk dress catching the lamplight, her movements unhurried and practiced. She did not notice Lily watching. She never had. Nobody did. Lily crossed the room. She picked up Nikolai's crystal glass from the table with both small hands. She turned to face him. Earnest, unafraid, her eyes holding the particular directness of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are too dangerous to speak. And she pointed one small finger past him, toward Natasha, standing in the background. Natasha froze. "She put something in your drink," Lily said, her voice clear and completely calm. "I saw her. She does it when you're not looking." The room went absolutely still. Natasha's expression fractured, panic and rage arriving simultaneously, colliding on her face with the force of someone watching years of careful performance end without warning. Her hands came up to her mouth, her eyes went wide. Nikolai looked at Lily. Then he turned, slowly, with the measured control of a man who has learned never to let a room see what he is thinking, and looked at his wife. Natasha had recovered enough to produce a sound of dismissal. "Kolya, she's a child. She doesn't understand what she's—" Nikolai held up one hand. Just one hand. The room went quieter than it had already been. He looked back at Lily. She had not moved. She was still pointing, still unafraid, still holding the glass. And Nikolai Voss, a man who had built an empire on the absolute certainty that no one could be fully trusted, found himself for the first time in his adult life believing someone completely. A Mafia boss had been dying for 4 months, and every specialist his money could reach had found nothing. He thought his body was failing him. He had no idea it was the woman standing in his own home. Drop a heart if you already feel what's coming. Lily is 5 years old. She doesn't know what Nikolai is or what her words are about to set in motion. She only knows what she saw. and she was not afraid to say it. Hit that like button and subscribe to Mafia Tales, because Natasha had 4 months of practice keeping this secret. It took one child 30 seconds to end it. That evening, dinner at the Voss estate unfolded in the same unhurried silence it always did. Nikolai sat at the head of the long table, the chandelier above casting its warm light across the crystal and the silverware and the carefully arranged dishes that Natasha oversaw with the attentiveness of a woman who understood that domestic perfection was its own form of performance. She sat across from him, emerald dress replaced now by something softer, her dark hair loose at her shoulders, her expression carrying the gentle, practiced concern of a devoted wife monitoring a sick husband. She rose from the table, moved to the kitchen, returned with the glass. It was tall and clear, filled with the dark mixture she had been preparing for him every evening for 4 months. Supplements, she always said. Vitamins. The doctor's recommendation, adjusted and improved by her own research because she cared about him and wanted him well. "You need to drink all of it tonight," she said, setting it before him with the same warmth she brought to every small act of care. "I added something extra. For the fatigue." Nikolai looked at the glass. For 4 months he had reached for it without thinking. An automatic gesture, as natural as breathing. The acceptance of something offered by someone he had chosen to trust in a life where trust was the rarest thing he possessed. He had noticed the taste once, early on, something beneath the bitterness of the greens, something faintly metallic and strange, and had attributed it to his illness, to the way sickness changes the body's perception of everything. He reached for it now. Lily's voice arrived in his mind before his fingers touched the glass. "She put something in your drink. I saw her. She does it when you're not looking." He lifted the glass, brought it to his lips, and for the first time in 4 months, instead of swallowing, he tasted. It was there, beneath everything else, beneath the fruit, beneath the greens, beneath the practiced palatability of something designed to be consumed without question. A bitterness that had no business in a wellness drink. Faint, precise, consistent. Not the bitterness of anything natural, the bitterness of something added. He had told himself it was the illness. He understood now that he had wanted to tell himself that. Natasha was watching him from across the table, her eyes tracking the glass, his mouth, his expression, with an attentiveness that he had spent 7 years reading as love and was reading now as something else entirely. "Does it taste all right?" she asked, her voice carrying the slight upward tilt of a woman asking a question she already knows the answer to. Nikolai lowered the glass. He looked at her. He produced the smile, the one he had spent 20 years perfecting, the one that had sat across negotiating tables from men who wanted him dead, and revealed nothing whatsoever of what was happening behind it. "It's good," he said. "I was thinking about tomorrow's meeting." Natasha's shoulders released a fraction. She turned to talk about something, a dinner they had been invited to, a detail about the East Wing renovation. Her voice carried its usual smooth warmth, the voice of a woman in a comfortable marriage discussing ordinary things. Nikolai listened. He nodded. He watched her face the way he watched rooms, cataloguing, measuring, rearranging everything he had previously filed under love into a different column entirely. When Natasha rose to take a call in the next room, he moved, quickly, without sound. 2 decades in a world where survival depended on moving without being seen. He crossed to the large ornamental plant beside the cabinet, the one Natasha had chosen herself, placed there herself, tended to with the same careful attention she brought to everything in this house. and emptied the glass into the soil at its base. By the time her footsteps returned, he was back in his chair, the empty glass beside his plate, his napkin against his mouth. Natasha stopped in the doorway. Her eyes went to the glass. "You finished it," she said. Something moved behind her eyes, there and gone, before he could name it. "I was thirsty," Nikolai said. She smiled, crossed the room, touched his shoulder as she passed, the habitual tenderness of a woman performing a marriage, and sat back down. Nikolai looked at the plant across the room. He thought about the glass, about the taste, about a 5-year-old in a yellow sweater, holding it up with both hands and pointing past him with complete certainty and absolute fearlessness. He thought about 4 months of drinking whatever Natasha put in front of him. He did not sleep that night. She had been doing it for 4 months. He had been drinking it for 4 months. One evening, without the glass. That was all it would take to confirm everything. Drop a heart if that plant just became the most important thing in this story. Subscribe to Mafia Tales, because Nikolai Voss has spent his entire life knowing when a room has turned against him. He just never expected the room to be his own home. And he never expected the only honest person in it to be 5 years old. The men who worked for Nikolai Voss had learned, over many years, to read the temperature of a room before they entered it. They knocked. They waited. They chose their words with the care of people who understood that the wrong sentence at the wrong moment had consequences that could not be undone. The mansion itself seemed to operate on the same principle. Its dark panelled walls, its heavy furniture, its corridors that absorbed sound and returned silence. A house built in the image of the man who owned it. Controlled, impenetrable, revealing nothing. What the men did not know, what Nikolai had spent 4 months ensuring they would not know, was that the man they were so careful around was falling apart. He felt it every morning before he opened his eyes, a heaviness that arrived ahead of consciousness, settling into his bones during the night and refusing to lift. He dressed in the dark with the precision of habit, knotting his tie in the mirror while his hands performed the task from memory, because watching them had become unreliable. The tremors were small, barely visible. He had learned to disguise them as impatience, gripping a pen, pressing a palm flat against the desk, and no one had noticed because no one looked at Nikolai Voss's hands expecting to find weakness. 7 specialists, 7 consultations conducted in rooms that cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. 7 men who had reviewed the same results and returned the same verdict, rewarded differently each time, and all saying the same thing. Nothing identifiably wrong. No diagnosis, no trajectory, no solution. He was simply declining. Consistently, efficiently, without cause. Each evening, Natasha brought the glass. She carried it with both hands, a gesture of care he had noticed early in their marriage, and filed under love. She set it before him with the particular gentleness of a woman attending to something precious. Supplements, she always explained. Adjusted for his specific deficiencies, researched carefully, prepared with the devotion of someone who could not bear to watch him suffer without doing something about it. He had drunk it for 4 months without question because it was offered with such practiced tenderness that questioning it would have felt like questioning her. He was a man who had built an empire on never being surprised. He had not seen this coming. Eleanor arrived at 7:15 on a Thursday morning, her cleaning cart in the corridor outside the East Wing, her daughter Lily 1 step behind her. Lily was 5, perhaps just turned 6. Small even for that, slight and quiet, wearing a faded yellow sweater 2 sizes too large that fell past her wrists, and denim overalls with a fraying hem. She moved through the mansion the way small children move through adult spaces, close to the walls, unhurried, making herself as unobtrusive as possible, not from shyness, but from observation. She had learned, early and thoroughly, that the best way to see a room was to become part of the furniture. Nobody looked at Lily. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody registered that she was registering everything. She had been in this house for 3 days. In 3 days, she had learned the rhythm of every room. She knew which doors stayed closed and which ones opened and closed on a schedule. She knew which men stood where and why. She knew the way the tall woman in the expensive dresses moved through the house when the tall man in the dark suits was present, carefully, attentively, always within a certain proximity, and the way she moved when he was not present, which was differently, faster, less careful. Like someone off stage between performances. She had watched Natasha at the drinks cabinet twice now. The first time she thought nothing of it. The second time she watched more carefully, because something about the quickness of Natasha's hands, the particular way they moved when Nikolai's attention was directed elsewhere, opening something small and adding it to the glass before the movements smoothed back into their usual elegant unhurry, made a feeling arrive in Lily's stomach that she did not have a word for yet. She had seen something like it before. Not here, somewhere else. Somewhere that had ended badly. On the 3rd afternoon, she followed her mother into the study to collect the afternoon tray and saw the crystal glass sitting on the table beside Nikolai's chair. Nikolai was at his desk, his back partially turned, reviewing documents. Natasha was near the cabinet. Her hands were moving. Lily watched. Then she crossed the room, picked up the glass with both small hands, turned to face Nikolai and pointed past him. He heard her before he saw her. A small sound, the deliberate placement of something on the table beside him, and then nothing, which was what made him look up. In Nikolai's world, silence was information. He turned from the document he was reading and found a child standing in front of him, holding his crystal glass in both hands with the solemnity of someone carrying something important, her eyes fixed on his with an expression that had no business on a face that young. She pointed past him, one small finger, extended with complete certainty toward the far side of the room. He turned. Natasha stood near the cabinet. She had gone very still. Something had happened to her face, a fracture running through the composure she maintained with such consistency, panic and rage arriving simultaneously in her expression, like 2 vehicles hitting the same point from different directions. Her hands came up to her mouth. Her eyes were wide. "She put something in your drink," Lily said. Her voice was clear and entirely calm. "I saw her. She does it when you're not looking." The room did not move. Nikolai looked at the child, at her eyes, earnest, unafraid, carrying the particular conviction of someone reporting a fact rather than making an accusation. Then he turned back to his wife. Natasha had recovered enough to produce a sound. "Kolya, she's a child, she doesn't understand." He raised one hand. The room went quieter than it had already been. He looked back at Lily. She had not moved. She was still pointing, still holding the glass, still looking at him with the steady patience of someone waiting for an adult to catch up with something she had already understood. He reached out and took the glass from her hands, gently. "Thank you," he said. He did not drink. Dinner that evening was identical to every dinner that had preceded it for 4 months. The chandelier, the silverware, the carefully arranged dishes. Natasha at the far end of the table, composed and attentive, asking about his afternoon, mentioning a detail about the weekend, her voice carrying its habitual warmth with the consistency of something very well rehearsed. She rose, moved to the kitchen, returned with the glass. "You should drink all of it," she said, setting it before him. "I increase the dosage slightly, for the fatigue." Nikolai looked at the glass, then at his wife. He had looked at her 10,000 times across this table and seen devotion. He looked at her now and saw the performance of devotion. Every component exactly where it had always been, assembled with genuine skill, and entirely hollow. He did not know yet how long it had been hollow. He suspected it had been a very long time. He lifted the glass, brought it to his lips, set it down without drinking. "You seem distracted," Natasha observed, her eyes moving to the glass and away with the practiced casualness of someone trying not to look at something. "Work," he said. "Tell me about the dinner on Saturday," she told him. He listened with the portion of his attention that managed surfaces, while the rest of him worked through what he knew and what he needed to confirm. When she left the room briefly, he crossed to the ornamental plant by the window, her choice, her placement, tended by her hands, and emptied the glass into the soil. He was in his chair when she returned, the empty glass beside his plate. Something crossed her eyes. There and gone. "You finished it quickly tonight?" "I was thirsty," she smiled. He smiled back. Two people performing a marriage across a table, one of them knowing it was a performance, and the other not yet knowing that he knew. That night he lay in the dark beside her and listened to her breathe, and looked at the ceiling, and did not sleep. He thought about 7 years, about the charity gala, where she had walked toward him without fear and said, "You look lonely." And he had believed, for the first time in his adult life, that someone was seeing the person rather than the power. He thought about how much he had wanted that to be true. He thought about what it meant that it hadn't been. He did not allow himself to feel it yet. Feeling it was for later. Right now, there was work to do. He woke before dawn. He sat on the edge of the bed in the grey pre-light and was still for a moment before he began the inventory. He had developed it over the past months, a private, systematic assessment conducted each morning in the minutes before Natasha woke, cataloguing the damage. He started with his hands. They were steady. He looked at them for a long moment, turning them over in the dim light, watching for the fine tremor that had become so habitual he had begun to think of it as a permanent condition. Nothing. He made a fist, opened it. The grip was clean and sure, the kind of grip he had had at 30, before whatever had been dismantling him had started its work. He stood, crossed to the window, read the time on the clock across the room without narrowing his eyes. The fog had not arrived. For the first time in 4 months, his mind was clear. The sharp, unobstructed clarity he had spent the last season grieving as a thing permanently lost. One night, one glass emptied into a plant pot instead of his body. The mathematics of that was simple, devastating, and conclusive. He stood at the window and looked out at the pre-dawn garden and understood completely. Behind him, Natasha's breathing was still the steady rhythm of sleep. He did not turn around. He did not let his face show what it needed to show, because old habits did not require daylight to function. He dressed, knotted his tie, left the room without waking her. He had calls to make. The man Nikolai called was not a doctor. He was someone who had worked for Nikolai for 11 years in a capacity that had no formal title, and who understood that requests came with 2 requirements: precision and silence, and that both were absolute. Nikolai handed him a sealed sample at 7 in the morning in the underground car park beneath the East Wing. No explanation, no context. A result required within 48 hours through a channel that did not connect back to this address. Then he went upstairs and had breakfast with his wife. He spent 2 days being exactly the man Natasha expected him to be. Present, slightly diminished by illness, grateful for her care. Unremarkable. He drank tea at dinner instead of the glass she brought him, citing nausea, and watched her accept this with an expression that was almost perfect. The result arrived on the second evening. He read it alone in the study with the door closed. The compound was identified, the dosage was calculated, precise, consistent, administered over a minimum of 16 weeks with the clear intention of mimicking degenerative illness and producing, eventually, organ failure. Not quickly, carefully, by someone who understood that a sudden death would raise questions that a slow decline would not. He set the report down. Then he made a second call. This one was not about chemistry. Vadim's name took 4 days to surface, 4 days of careful, invisible work. Threads pulled from the financial accounts that Nikolai had trusted his brother-in-law to manage. Numbers that had been moved with considerable skill but not enough skill. A 2-year embezzlement that would have been exposed at the annual audit that was now 6 weeks away. Vadim had needed the audit cancelled. The only way to cancel it was to ensure Nikolai was not present to authorize it. Natasha had been the instrument. Whether she had been recruited or had volunteered was a question Nikolai found he did not particularly need answered. He began moving pieces into position. Quietly, with the cold, systematic efficiency of a man who had done this before, had never had to do it this close, and was not going to need to do it twice. He asked her to come to the study on a Tuesday evening. She arrived in the emerald dress, the one she had been wearing on the afternoon Lily had pointed past him across the room, and Nikolai noticed this without expression, filed it, and closed the door. He did not sit. He stood near his desk with his hands in his pockets and looked at his wife with the particular quality of attention he reserved for situations that required absolute accuracy. Natasha looked back at him. She had excellent instincts. He had always known that. He could see them working now, reading the room, reading him, calculating the distance between what she knew and what he might know. Her expression was composed, cautious. He placed the laboratory report on the desk between them, said nothing. She looked at it. He watched her face in the moment of recognition, the moment the calculation completed and the result arrived. Something broke, not dramatically, not with noise. A fracture running through years of performance, and underneath it, finally, the real thing. Panic. Then something colder. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough," he said. She did not offer an explanation. He did not ask for one. There was a version of this conversation that involved words like love and desperation and Vadim made me, and Nikolai had no interest in any of it. The report was sufficient. The accounts were sufficient. He already knew everything he needed to know. "You'll leave tonight," he said. "What you take is what you came with, nothing from this house." She looked at him for a moment. "And Vadim?" "Vadim," Nikolai said, "is already handled." She left at 9 that evening. He watched from the study window as the car moved down the drive and disappeared through the gate. Then he sat down at his desk in the quiet house and stayed there for a long time, not working, not reading, simply sitting with the particular weight of a man who has been proved right about something he very much wanted to be wrong about. The house was large. The silence was total. He thought about a 5-year-old in a yellow sweater who had held up a glass and told him the truth without asking for anything in return. He thought that was probably enough for one night. Elena stayed. He had not asked her to specifically. He had simply not asked her to leave, and she had continued arriving at 7:15 each morning with the same quiet competence she always brought. And Lily had continued arriving with her. The child began appearing in the study. The first time it was accidental, a wrong turn on the way back from the kitchen, or something that looked like one. She stood in the doorway and looked at him with the same directness she had always had, and he looked back, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "You can come in," he said. She came in. She looked at the chess set on the side table. She looked at him. "Do you know how to play?" he asked. She shook her head. He moved his chair to the other side of the table. She learned quickly. She asked questions with the relentless, unembarrassed curiosity of a child who had not yet been taught that some questions were unwelcome. About the pieces, about the rules, about why he had so many books if he was always working, about whether he was sad, about whether his hands still shook. He answered all of them. He found, to his considerable surprise, that he did not mind being asked. The questions adults had always brought to this room were about the empire, about money, about operations, about the management of threat. Lily's questions were about him, and she asked them because she wanted to know the answers rather than because she could use them. He had not previously understood how different those two things felt. Elena came to collect her one afternoon and found them both examining the chessboard in silence, Lily's legs swinging from the chair, Nikolai's elbows on the table. Eleanor stood in the doorway for a moment with an expression he filed carefully and did not address. They were careful with each other, he and Eleanor. Two people who had learned, through different circumstances and with different costs, that care was something to be offered slowly and received with equal caution. He did not ask her about her life in the way that powerful men ask questions that are really requests. She did not treat him with the deference that people in his employ routinely produced, and that he had always found exhausting. They spoke plainly. They were honest about what they didn't know. On an evening in November, Lily fell asleep in the chair by the study fire, a chess piece still in her hand, her yellow sweater pulled up over her chin. Elena stood to wake her. "Leave her," Nikolai said. Elena sat back down. He poured 2 cups of tea. They sat on either side of the sleeping child and talked for 2 hours. About nothing urgent and everything important. And when he looked across the firelight at this woman who had asked nothing from him and given him more than she knew, he understood that the house had become, without his planning it or deserving it, something different from what it had been before. The wedding was in March, 40 people. The garden of the estate, which Eleanor had persuaded him to open up. "It's a beautiful garden, Collier. Someone should use it." Strung with quiet lights and filled with the particular warmth of a gathering where everyone present had actually been chosen. Lily walked ahead of them as flower girl, with the solemn, radiant concentration of someone performing the most important task of the year. Her yellow sweater retired for the occasion in favor of pale pink, her face luminous with the pride of a child who has been trusted with something real. That evening, the 4 of them sat in the sitting room that had once been a room where Nikolai conducted business and was now a room where people lived. Lily was against his side, her head on his arm, the day's excitement giving way to the heavy, peaceful stillness of a child coming down from something wonderful. She was quiet for a while. Then she looked up at him. "Uncle Collier?" "Yes." She thought about it. "Can I call you something else?" The room was very quiet. He looked at her, this child in the faded yellow sweater, who had walked into his study 11 months ago and held up a glass and pointed past him and said 4 words that had, without her knowing it or intending it, saved not just his life, but the person inside it. He looked at her and felt something arrive that he had no word for and did not try to name. "What would you like to call me?" he said. She considered it seriously, the way she considered everything. "Papa," she said, "if that's all right." He did not answer immediately. He could not. Eleanor's hand found his across the back of the sofa, and he held it, and the fire went on burning, and Lily waited with the patience of a child who already knew the answer and was simply giving him time to arrive at it. "That's all right," he said. 10 years passed. The university hall was full and bright with June light. The rows of graduating students in their gowns, the families in the audience carrying the particular mixture of pride and relief that graduation days produce. In the front row, 3 people sat with an emotion that had moved well beyond either. Nikolai, 51 now, silver at his temples, the kind of stillness about him that had shifted over the years from threat to gravity. Eleanor beside him, her hand in his. And between them, a space that was not empty. It was the space that Lily had vacated when she walked up to the stage, and both of them were still looking at it. Lily stood at the microphone in her cap and gown, 20 years old, and looked out at the hall with the same directness she had always had. 10 years ago, she said, I was a small girl in a yellow sweater who spent her afternoons watching other people, because that was what I knew how to do. I watched a man in a dark suit sit in a dark room and get smaller every day, and I told him what I saw because it seemed wrong to stay quiet. The hall was very still. He gave me a chess set and answered every question I asked, and came to every school play and never once made me feel like I was too small or too young or too much. He taught me that the most dangerous people are sometimes the safest ones to trust, and that the best thing you can build is not an empire. She paused, found his face in the front row. It's a home. Nikolai did not try to hide what was on his face. Eleanor was already crying, quietly, with the unself-conscious ease of a woman who had long ago decided that some moments deserve to be felt completely. He put his arm around her. In the study at the estate, on the table where the chess set still lived, the crystal glass stood where it had always stood. He had never moved it. His staff had learned not to ask. It was not there as a reminder of Natasha, or of Vadim, or of 4 months of slow poison administered by practiced hands. It was there because a small girl had picked it up with both hands and held it out to him and told him the truth. And everything, the house, the woman beside him, the voice at the microphone, had come from that one moment of fearless, uncalculating honesty. He had survived a great many things in his life. That was the one that had saved him.